All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our fourth day of our lunchtime series this December. Ethical issues in pediatric gene therapy clinical trials. Every day at noon this week until 1 p.m. through December 4th. So today's talk is entitled "Lived Experiences: The Personal and Family Impact of Participating in Pediatric Gene Therapy Research." We invite you to join us tomorrow for the final day of the series, where we'll hear from Sanya McRae on operationalizing informed consent and pediatric gene therapy research. If you haven't registered yet, registration for the final lecture is still open and can be found at our Eventbrite page, which is linked in the email you received for today. The lecture series is brought to you by the NYU Grossman School of Medicine, Division of Medical Ethics Working Group on Pediatric Gene Therapy and Medical Ethics, or PGTME. So everyone's aware, you can find more about our group, PGTME, which will be linked in the chat, and you can sign up for its quarterly newsletter to stay abreast of the work that we're doing ongoing. My name is Moshe Cohn. I'm an assistant professor of pediatrics at Hassenfeld Children's Hospital at NYU Langone Health in New York City. I'm board certified in pediatric critical care medicine and hospice and palliative medicine, and I'm a certified healthcare ethics consultant. I sit on the ethics committee at NYU, and I teach medical ethics at the NYU Grossman School of Medicine and affiliated training programs, and I'm a member of PGTME. Today's event, we will feature a presentation by John Crowley, who I will formally introduce momentarily. During Mr. Crowley's presentation, please submit your questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. And after the presentation, there will be a brief response by Patrick Moeschen, who I will also introduce momentarily. After that, I'll pose some questions you've submitted via the Q&A to both of our speakers until we run out of time. So let's talk about our speakers. First, I'll introduce our respondent. Mr. Moeschen is a middle school music teacher. He was diagnosed with Becker muscular dystrophy in 1985 and re-diagnosed with limb-girdle 2E muscular dystrophy in 2012. He earned a master's in counseling and human relations from Liberty University in 2006 and continues to teach full-time and was awarded the Teacher of the Year for the state of New Hampshire in 2007. He's an advocate for children and adults with muscular dystrophy and has presented at disability conferences across the US, as well as in Australia, Italy, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Our first speaker is John Crowley, Chairman and CEO of Amicus Therapeutics. John's involvement with biotechnology stems from the 1998 diagnosis of two of his children with Pompe disease, a severe and often fatal neuromuscular disorder. In his drive to find a cure for them, he left his position at Bristol Myers Squibb and became an entrepreneur as the co-founder, president, and CEO of Novozyme Pharmaceuticals, the biotech startup conducting research on a new experimental treatment for Pompe disease, which he credits as ultimately saving his children's lives. In 2001, Novozyme was acquired by Genzyme Corporation, and John continued to play a lead role in the development of a drug for Pompe disease as senior vice president of Genzyme Therapeutics. John served as the national chairman of the Make-A-Wish Foundation of America from 2014 to 2016, and is a founding board member of the Global Genes Project. John is a Henry Crown Fellow at the Aspen Institute. Without further ado, I'd like to thank Mr. Crowley for joining us today, and I will turn the mic over to him.
Great, Moshe, thank you for the introduction. It's great to be with everybody here today in this Zoom world and to talk about this really important and frankly, to all of us, a very relevant and important topic around gene therapy. Really four things I'd like to focus on in my remarks today. First is to just talk briefly about the opportunities with gene therapy as we think about it from a family and patient perspective, and to think about obviously all the ethical considerations here. But first, to talk about the opportunities. Secondly, to talk about the challenges and what we see and how we will develop a framework for overcoming those challenges. Third, then to focus on the path forward. And fourth, I'd like to talk a little bit about ensuring access for all with gene therapies. So to talk about opportunities, challenges, path forward, and access for all. Before I do that though, let me maybe just step back a little bit in history for just some thoughts about our family's journey and perspective in the context of gene therapy. So as Moshe indicated, I is the dad of two children living with a rare form of neuromuscular disease, Pompe disease. Like many of us, our worlds changed when we received a diagnosis. And for us, that was in March of 1998 when we were told that our then 15-month-old daughter, Megan, had this rare form of a muscular dystrophy. We were told it was very severe. She wouldn't live to be but a couple of years old. And other than not walking, Megan was seemingly healthy at the time, but we were told she'd be very sick very quickly. And the doctor also looked down in the car carrier that we had with us at our then 7-day-old son, Patrick, and said that there is a 25% chance that he may have the disease and he would need to be tested. And we did very soon after that test Patrick and got the diagnosis that he too was living with Pompe. That entered our family into the whole world of medicine, of science, of research, a world that was entirely unfamiliar to us, one that was daunting, scary, but with glimmers of hope. One of those glimmers of hope was I learned about a new area of science, a new technology called gene therapy. It was again 1998 and I was not in the medical field and I didn't know anything about gene therapy. So I read some papers and I actually called a doctor, one of the world's leading researchers, then at Johns Hopkins. And I asked a lot of questions, most of them probably pretty naive, about gene therapy. And then I asked the question that I think every parent would ask or does ask today. And that's, when can my child participate in a clinical study for this gene therapy? And the researcher then in 1998, incredibly talented, passionate researcher, said maybe 2 at the outside. That was 1998, more than 22 years ago. We are now just in our world in Pompe disease coming into the potential for gene therapies for people. It's incredibly exciting. In the category of opportunities, we've come a long way in our world in Pompe disease, more broadly in the neuromuscular field, and then certainly more broadly for all rare diseases. I share that story with you because, for all of us, time is as important as beating the mistakes of nature, this urgent sense of beating the clock, if you will. And that's incredibly important in medicine broadly, but particularly important when you talk about rare diseases, especially in some of the most severe of rare diseases that we work in. Despite all the best science at the time, gene therapy is, I know Jim Wilson and others have talked about the great history and overcoming some of the great technical challenges in gene therapy. The gene therapy field, frankly, after 1999 is one I didn't pay much attention to for a long time. The first company that we founded focused on enzyme replacement therapies. As we formed my current company, Amicus, in 2005, we focused on small molecule precision medicines, then enzyme therapies. And for a long time, again, I really spent very little time focused in the world of gene therapy. So let me then talk a little bit about opportunities. It was about 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago, where I met a young child and their family with SMA type 1, spinal muscular atrophy. And as we know, a devastating neuromuscular disease, particularly the type 1 children who almost never live past a year of age. They don't ever walk, incredibly devastating disease. And I saw a little boy who was a couple of years old with SMA type 1 who was thriving, was beginning to walk. And, we're blessed, Eileen and I, my wife and I are blessed to have met just thousands of families living with rare diseases in this lifelong journey for our family. But seeing that child, it was almost like, I've been hearing and reading and seeing a lot about the promise of gene therapy. You were seeing some new companies like Audentes and others just being formed with great vision, great science. Going back to 2012, 2013, 14, a reemergence of the potential for gene therapy. And I was seeing some of the data and reading the papers, but not until I actually saw a child who had received a gene therapy that seems to have saved his life and fundamentally changed the course of the disease. Whether it's a cure or not, it's on the path to curative therapies. I had this light go off. I said, I think we're finally there. And so, for our company, we began to look pretty hard at gene therapy. But I think when we think about what we could potentially do now with gene therapy, to be able to treat diseases that have been death sentences before for children, for adults, to think about neuromuscular diseases, to think about neurodegenerative diseases, to think about the range of opportunities that we have to impact patients' lives is really exciting. And the good news is gene therapy is working. We know about the first early now approved therapies for SMA type 1, for a rare form of blindness in children, others that we're just on the cusp now over the next couple of years. I really believe finally, after decades and decades of work in gene therapy, we're to the point of just beginning to enter now this golden age of medicine. So very exciting time. With that said, there are still challenges. We have not unlocked all the secrets of how we solve. In fact, most of them remain challenges and secrets to us in the world of gene therapy. Let me talk about a couple of those challenges. So if there's an enormous amount of opportunity and hope, real hope, there are also challenges that we have to and we will overcome. But let me describe a couple of those because I think it's very important for everybody in this world of gene therapy, particularly families and patients, to understand. So the first is the overriding notion that this is different than any other therapy from an ethical standpoint. In the world of enzyme replacement therapies, we want a therapy that's safe. We want a therapy that's effective. It would, for many of the lysosomal disorders, for instance, the approved therapies are lifelong therapies, oftentimes in every week or every other week infusion. And what you want to do is to have a therapy that changes the course of a disease, that creates time, literally more time for people to live and for them to thrive, time for them to have better quality of life, but also time for researchers, for entrepreneurs like us to go back to the drawing board to think about, okay, we made a difference in patients' lives. It wasn't a cure, but we've extended and enhanced life. How can we do better? And we go back and think about what's the next therapy, what's the next enzyme therapy, the next small molecule, the next RNA technology, maybe the next gene therapy. Gene therapy itself, though, is different, particularly when we think about the AAV-based technologies. By introducing this virus as the delivery vector, for many patients, it may be the only chance they have to ever take at least an AAV-based gene therapy. And that's a really important concept because now, while we still focus on safety, we focus on, maximum efficacy, and we focus on time, this notion that we have to beat time in so many of these diseases. We also have to balance that as we look forward, through this risk-benefit lens. We have to balance it against the notion that we can't just say, well, we'll take this one, then we'll move on to the next best therapy, or we'll, make these small incremental but meaningful improvements in people's lives with newer and better gene therapies. Maybe, and I think someday we will, but by and large, the technology is not there to do that. And by introducing these viruses, you may very well permanently immunize a patient from ever again receiving another similar gene therapy. And that's a really important concept. So tuck that away for a second. Some of the technical challenges that we continue to focus on, we and the regulators, very importantly, first are analytics. We always need to know, whatever medicine it may be, what's the quality of the medicine we're giving and what's the quantity that we're giving. With gene therapy, that's incredibly important to know the amount of vector, how much virus are we giving. It's important to make sure we're giving enough so that it's effective, and important also to make sure that we're not giving too much, because obviously it could cause acute toxicities and harms. We need to understand the basics of how we're characterizing the quantity and quality. And we're making significant improvements. You'll hear, for instance, talk about a potency assay, very important concept in gene therapy. These aren't just box checking by regulators. This is incredibly important. And I commend the FDA and other regulators for working with industry, with researchers, to ensure that we have the analytical tools to ensure the safety and the efficacy of these medicines. These are really difficult tools to develop, oftentimes take many, many months, sometimes years to develop just the analytical tools. So that's one challenge for us. Second is, once we got the basic science and we understand the disease, we understand the fundamental biology, we understand the mechanism of action of how a gene therapy is going to work, after we can use the right analytical tools to quantify and qualify the material that we're going to be giving to a patient, we then have to make sure we can manufacture it. And we have to manufacture it consistently. We have to manufacture it at scale so that we can get it to all patients in need. And again, incredibly important that we know the dose that we are giving. We have seen many, there's just been this abundance of research that's occurring that's incredibly exciting at the academic levels. By and large, most academic centers are not very well suited for manufacturing for clinical studies. And in almost every case, with few exceptions, they are not positioned for anything near late stage clinical or commercial scale, both for the amount of material and the quality. So manufacturing, we are now to the point where we need larger scale systems. We need, oftentimes these are dosed on a milligram per kilogram basis if it's an AAV-based therapy. And we know increasingly we're finding more patients living with many of these diseases, and we've got to get to everybody. We are in the process, as in the academy for sure, but also within companies particularly, and in the world of contract manufacturers, a whole new series of technologies are being discovered and invented to enable the manufacturing. There are research programs we have at my company that are incredibly exciting, that look exciting in animals, that we know we can make at scale to treat patients in clinical studies, but we don't yet have the technology invented to make it at large enough scale to get it to everybody in need once these are approved products. And that's okay. We can do this, and we are doing this in parallel as a broad industry effort. This is biologics manufacturing. So we can take decades of experience in making antibodies, making enzyme replacement therapies, and apply that to the world of gene therapy. So we're, again, another great challenge in addition to the analytics is the manufacturing technologies. We are making great progress. We will solve all of these issues, and we'll solve them, I think, in the next couple of years. Reminds me very much of the antibody world in the 1990s, inventing new manufacturing technologies, but we have to do it. A third challenge is safety. The immune response elicited by these gene therapies can be significant. Incredibly important that we focus on safety. Obviously, you can focus on the acute toxicities that can be life-threatening, can cause mortality, and we've seen challenges as we go into the clinic. We need to minimize the risk here. We may never eliminate the risk, but we need to minimize the risk. So inventing new technologies, thinking about drug development and how we approach these diseases in a very different way. I, like Jim Wilson and others, are very concerned about systemic high-dose AAV delivery. We've seen the challenges. We have to do better. Focused on safety, incredibly important. But again, it's safety not just from the acute toxicology standpoint, the acute side effect and reaction that patients can have. It's also thinking about safety for how does this impact the efficacy of the gene therapy? Again, that notion of if you're not careful, you may permanently immunize people from receiving gene therapy. So incredibly important to think about, incredibly important. And I know we'll touch on this tomorrow in the whole concept of informed consent. Informed consent here is going to be different than it is for virtually all other clinical studies. We do need to think also, as a very important ethical point, about dosing. Typically, you would do dose ranging. You do dose ranging to find a minimally effective dose, a no effect dose in some cases, maximal efficacy, trying to find within that, where is the therapeutic window where you have the most minimal side effects with maximum efficacy. That is very hard to do in the world of gene therapy. And I believe very strongly giving intentionally low doses to people with these diseases, knowing that you may permanently affect their ability to ever receive a gene therapy, is unethical. To, for instance, deliver to a child with a fatal neuromuscular or brain disease a low dose of a gene therapy that is unlikely to have an impact, that I think is unethical. We have to think about this differently. So it may be that we have to get the best data that we can from the scientific research that we do, from the preclinical and animal studies that we do, to go into many of these diseases with one dose. Again, the dose that we think will have the appropriate side effect profile and optimal efficacy. So we have to think about dose ranging very, very differently. That relates to what I'll highlight here is the last challenge to think about, particularly in the ethical context, and that's the design of the clinical studies. How do we think about the comparators here? Oftentimes we have done clinical studies where the comparator group is a placebo. Here, for many of these diseases, I think it's very challenging to the point of being unethical to deliver a placebo. And you think about some of these rapidly progressive diseases like in SMA type 1, like some of the severe lysosomal storage diseases that affect the brain in children. For us as a community, I think we need to work together, all of us with a common interest in seeing safe and effective gene therapies developed. We have to work together. With us, as we think about moving forward, we need to think about what are the controls here. And when we think about placebo controls, we need to think more about natural history studies. So in the path forward, what we need to now think about, so we've had the opportunities, we've had kind of that golden age of medicine. There are a lot of challenges, we're solving them, but it's still going to take time. The path forward, I think, is one where we work together with regulators. We come up with standards broadly applicable to diseases where in the gene therapy field, we think, for instance, where is randomization, where are placebos appropriate, and where is it simply not appropriate or ethical? Where do you need to focus on natural history studies? Where do we need to be flexible? This does not mean we go away from the gold standard of safety and efficacy, but where do we need to develop a regulatory framework that really is custom tailored for each single disease, by molecule, by disease? Again, a more advanced and sophisticated way to look at benefit risk assessments, incredibly important, I think, in the world of gene therapy. And then finally, ensuring access for all. Until we can ensure that every person in need has access to the most sophisticated gene therapy technology, until that day, this mission will be incomplete. And that means also thinking about not just the developed world, but the developing world. We cannot have diseases that are on the path to, or ultimately someday are curative, and simply say they're only for those who can afford it. That means there is a burden on industry to increasingly find ways to make these medicines more affordable. It's on all of us as a society to think about how and when do we pay for this? How do we provide for the most vulnerable? And then particularly for all of us in the developed world to think about those in the developing world to get them to people in need. When we do this, we will fundamentally change people's lives. And that's the best part of medicine. And that's why for so many of us, this is a lifelong journey, a lifelong mission, a vocation. This is a really hard job. Almost everything we try, it doesn't work. But when it does work, I still think it's one of the most rewarding aspects of life. And for many of us, for our careers. I will close with just a very brief video that we'll share with you for my daughter, Megan, who is, as I talked about in the beginning of my talk here, in 1998, told that she wouldn't live, we were told she wouldn't live to be 2 years old. Megan fought hard, ended up on a ventilator, in a wheelchair her whole life. And Megan, great medicine and a lot of people stepping up. Megan received that life-saving enzyme replacement therapy in 2003. Her brother as well, the same day, Patrick. Megan and Patrick are today 23 and 22 years old. Patrick works as a 22-year-old in a flower shop in Princeton, in New Jersey. Megan in 2019 graduated from the University of Notre Dame. She is now a second-year student in a master's in social work program at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And when you think about the impact that medicine has had on their lives, it is inspirational for all of us, but it gives us all great hope of what to come. So I'll just play this video and you'll get some sense of Megan's journey through college.
Megan was 14 months old when she was diagnosed with Pompe disease.
We were told that she lived to be maybe 2 years old, so we were most focused on just getting past the next few days and months.
We have taught Megan that she is no different from anybody else. Just because she can't walk or breathe on her own, that doesn't mean she can't do everything, just about anything anybody else can do.
She's gotten deeply involved in the Make-A-Wish Club, now the president of the Make-A-Wish Club.
The only way that a child could do this is to want to do it themselves.
When you think about the challenges that Megan lives with every day, we able-bodied people would look at that and think, oh my God, how does she do it? For Megan, I think she looks at it and thinks, how do you not do it? This is my life.
Megan is absolutely going to graduate. Megan's going to get a job. She's going to get married. And she's going to have children. And she will tell you the exact same thing. Great. Thanks for listening.
John, oh, I hear Moshe. There's Moshe. Okay. John, thank you so much for that talk. It's outstanding to be on the panel with you and with everybody else that has allowed me to come on. Watching that video makes me want to meet Megan, and she's an inspiration to all of us. I think that it's amazing what you've been able to bring to the table of rare disease, and the hope that you share with all of us is it's palpable. I know that never having met you until a couple of weeks ago when we chatted, excuse me, it gives all of us hope, and lots of people hope that you've never met, that what you're doing and your company is doing, and the bio companies around the world, it kind of pushes us to live our best lives while we wait for science and medicine to reach up. So I really am, it's a pleasure to speak with you on these important topics. And certainly, like everybody else this week, we're probably going to leave all the panelists with more questions than answers. But I think important scientific dialogue is also a great thing. Your presentation, you mentioned outstanding points about everything. I'd like to just, tell everybody also a little bit about access from where I sit. As a 48-year-old man, I am married. I have 2 kids. I work full time, and as you heard in my intro, I have limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, and I was not diagnosed until the age 12, but it was 1985. So that might as well have been the Stone Age in this kind of thing, because there was no DNA testing at all. So they just assumed I had Becker muscular dystrophy because of my age, and I lived with that for about 25 years until a few researchers said, you're in your mid to late 30s here, you don't have contractions, you don't have normal signs of Becker, so let's do an array and find out what's going on. So I was actually re-diagnosed at age 38. I'm bringing that up because one of the things you mentioned about access is I think it's important for everybody to make sure they know exactly what they're dealing with. If I was able to get into a clinical trial when I was younger, and it was something that was going to be tested on people with Duchenne or Becker, it would have done absolutely nothing but skewed the data, because that's not even where my protein deficiencies lie. So, we live in a world now where it's much easier, I think, to be diagnosed at 100% accuracy than it used to be. So that, that's an important thing not to be overlooked. I lived for 25 years with a disease that I didn't actually have, that I thought I did, which definitely, that scrambled my brain around a little bit. The other point that I want to make is, you talked greatly about access for everybody. And I would say the other thing that we all need to be aware of and we need to look at is, how do we reach the people that do not have possibly the socioeconomic means to get tied in with the greatest care they can, and get tied in with fundraising and frankly getting companies interested. I've actually had people say to me, boy, I bet you're bummed out that you got the wrong disease. I said, what are you talking about? They said, well, you're pretty rare. So companies, of course, want to work on cancer and things that are everywhere because the money flows in. But what about the fact that you have muscular dystrophy and a rare form of muscular dystrophy? How do you rectify that with a company when they know that even if they make some sort of a genetic treatment or even any sort of medicine, there's not going to be a lot of money involved? It's what a bummer you got the wrong disease. And I thought, man, that's kind of an ignorant statement. I didn't ask for any disease. I certainly didn't choose this, but it started me thinking of, how do we as human beings get companies interested with rare disease? I mean, it's great that you were able to put all this attention down, on Pompeii and the world and stuff. But I wish, with all respect, I wish we all had a John Crowley and we were all able to, raise the kind of money and the kind of work you've been able to do. Like I said, it's enlightening and it's great. I just, I wish it was everywhere. And for people that are even more rare and more outlying, when they Google things and there might not even be more than a couple of websites, that's something to not overlook. In the rarest of the rare, how do we reach those people? How do we educate them? How do we educate the scientists and the doctors about their conditions? And how do we level the playing field for care with people that maybe don't have the socioeconomic means to receive that care? My other main point, and then, John and I are good at going back and forth, and we're, excuse me, we're welcoming questions. My other main point is simply the fact that in the world of rare disease, I'm a dinosaur. Like I said, I'm 48. So although it is extremely important for me, and I'm very hopeful, and I watch the genetic therapy landscape very closely, I often wonder what happens to all the people like me out there that have lived our entire lives waiting, and now we are considered old. And all the testing and the clinical trials, most of them, with few exceptions, focus on very young children. And I understand why. I understand it has to do with there's less disease. Perhaps it's not progressed enough. I mean, I understand the science, but it's also, when you want to talk about the ethics of justice and fairness, what happens to all of us out here that are old? And we've kind of been told, well, we'll get to you when we get to you. Good luck with your life. And we hope that you do okay. And listen, you're a hero. You can rise above this and you can do everything. But here we wait. And then a couple of times when I might have been able to sneak into some sort of a trial, I'm instantly denied just because of the measurements that everybody uses in the muscular dystrophy world. A lot of things are about the 6-minute walk test. I mean, I haven't taken a step in 18 years. So they can measure anything they want that they put into me. It's not going to get me out of the chair. So, I've been on a lot of panels where we've talked about different endpoints and things that the FDA might be able to measure that might make it a little bit more able for us, older people, to get in on this sort of work. I think it would be important too for feedback of us older people, because we can intelligently speak about what we feel, what's going on, where when you have a small child, there's, obviously the child might not even be able to tell you what they're feeling if they're that young. So I realize that it's very important to work with all the children, and for the timelines that, like John was saying, we'll listen, if you come up with something that buys us 5 minutes, we'll take it. But there has to be a way to get it out to more of the population, or to look at different segments of the population, excuse me, that perhaps are not young. I'm just looking over at my notes here. I think I hit everything that I wanted to talk about in answer to John. But John, I don't know if you want to dialogue with me for a moment about some of the things I mentioned, or if we want to open to Q&A. I want to thank everybody for having me on today, and hopefully we raise some questions for you guys to think hard about.
No, Patrick, those are excellent points, and particularly the one that you brought up about the size of the population with a rare disease. That's increasingly important for gene therapies. You look at some of these rare neurodegenerative diseases where, there were handfuls of kids diagnosed. In some cases, they're still really small diseases. I look at a disease like NGLY1 that my friend Matt Wilsey and his wife Kristen have been champions for, developing therapies for their daughter Grace and others. They've tried to find every kid in the world, and I think they have. And they're still at, like, I don't know where they're in the dozens of patients, not in the hundreds or the thousands. Maybe they'll ultimately get there. But we have to think of a way. How do we provide incentives for research for the rarest of the rare diseases? Because right now, you're right. If it's a disease where there's maybe really only 50 people in the world known to have it, it's probably many more, but who can you really address in a reasonable period of time? That's a very difficult model. I can't come up with a business case for that. There's no price I could charge for the medicine. It just doesn't make sense, particularly when there's thousands of potential rare diseases. And
Sure.
we don't go, in industry, and certainly at Amicus, we don't go in order of prevalence, how many people have it. We work in pretty rare diseases. But when you get to the most rare, we don't have a good model for that today. So to think about, even clinical studies, you get some of these diseases, you may fill up your clinical study with the half of the known patients in the world. And by the way, for gene therapy, once they receive that gene therapy, they're never going to be a paying patient. You're never going to generate any revenue to fund the research and development. So it's a very different business model as well. So we just have to think differently about it. What we can't do, though, is to say, well, we'll get to it someday, or the model doesn't work for those patients. We got to find a way to make it work. And there are some really interesting ideas that we can continue the dialogue on in the months and years ahead. But, real important. I spent a good part of my life in the military, and that whole notion of no person left behind. That has to be the mindset, not a single person left behind. And it means some tough discussions, and that's okay. Those are the ones we need to welcome.
I totally agree with you. And I want to bring to the attention of everybody listening today too, is, John, you touched upon it a little bit, and I did at the end, is the concept of risk. We have a differing idea of what that means as well between the children and the adults of the rare disease population. It would be great to have more data on exploring what treating adults is like, and how we could offer different feedback than the younger populations.
Absolutely.
And also, how is the risk weighed? I mean, clearly when it was your children, you and your wife were making the decisions because they were too small to make the decisions on their own. So for a parent, we have that whole ethical mess, if you will, to step into, where the risk and the benefits. And I know in the muscular dystrophy world, there are families that I've spoken to that have said, well, this disease is not going to end well. So even if there's a glimmer that it might work, give me that, let me try it. And I think that's a very dangerous to run willy-nilly into the wall here and think, well, they're in big trouble anyway, so let's just take the first thing we can get. So I believe we have a lot of difficult conversations regarding risk as well. Your thoughts on that, sir?
Yeah, no, very true. And particularly on the benefit side, again, with the more traditional therapy, a modest benefit is okay. Because again, it buys you time and quality of life, gives us time to go back, try something new. You know, the notion of just keep moving the ball down the field, slowly but surely. Gene therapy is different. Just being okay or maybe good may not be good enough, even in a really severe disease. And if the trade-off is you've got to wait another year or 2 or 3 for an approach that's going to be maybe a bit safer and maybe a lot more effective, you probably would wait in most of these diseases. And that's, again, a very different mindset than virtually any other medicine we've ever had available.
Absolutely. And from the clinical standpoint and from the work that you do, you know, I totally understand that. And in the patient world, and again, this is where it's amazing to speak to you because you're on both sides and a lot of people are not. But I think the amazing thing here to think about as well is, and everybody that's out there that's in the healthcare profession watching this right now, you have all in your offices had desperate parents and desperate families, you know, and how do you even begin a dialogue of the, you know, they don't want to hear about science and oligos and, you know, AAV vector. They're, you know, they're skipping right through it and they're saying to you, listen, my child is in huge trouble, the worst kind there is. What do we do? You know, and that's what I kind of was talking about, the big risk issue. There's no easy answer, but it's a conversation that I think we need to continue to have.
Yeah, again, in gene therapy, it may not need to be perfect, but it needs to be really safe and it needs to be pretty darn good.
Sure. Yeah. And you have to balance the weight with the questions of, like you said, you know, how long can you wait? It's just, yeah. And I mean, you and I could go on for hours just with this.
Yeah. And the risk that you look at, the risk a mom or dad are going to be willing to take for a child with a disease like SMA type 1 is going to be very different than you're going to take with limb-girdle.
Absolutely true. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's always the case. It's especially the case in gene therapy.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you. This is, do we want to do Q&A now, Dr. Cohn?
Yeah, I think we can. I think it's a great spot. First of all, thank you both. The just hearing the two of you talk is amazing, not only because, I mean, you know, Pat, we've spoken before at our meetings and we've had conversations that sort of include all the science and but also what we're really talking about here is the experience that you've had, Pat, as a patient, and John, you've had as a dad, and then, you know, getting into the business of all this. And I think that's really where so much of what we've been talking about this week, right, the nexus of all this and how we make that work. And that we've been getting a whole bunch of questions here that sort of I start to really dig at this, and I want to be great to look at some of them. First, I just want to mention for those of you who've been sending in questions about some of the immunogenicity and the science, a lot of those issues have been addressed at some of the earlier panels this week. And once those are uploaded to our site and our YouTube channel, you'll be able to see those. But we want to focus on really how gene therapy and the promise of it, and as John said, the many failures are affecting families and how they will affect families. So the first question, actually, which I think is a great one, what advice would you give parents, perhaps of lesser means, who've received news that their child's been diagnosed with an ultra rare disease, and what options do they have?
You know, I think regardless of means, Moshe, I think the most important thing is to focus on your child, that care. And in many of these diseases, it's a balance. It's a balance of certainly keeping them healthy, free from pain, of learning everything you can about the disease and thinking what are the therapeutic options ahead. It's that balance with also enjoying life and enjoying time. And I'll be honest with you, in the early years after our kid's diagnosis, I struggled with that a great deal. I was so hyper-focused on treatments and cures. You know, I think even the times maybe when I was there and I tried to be there as much as I could, I wasn't there in my mind, my heart. Maybe I was thinking about, you know, well, let me talk to this doctor and let me see if I can get this program this much more forward, you know, and sitting there and maybe missing the moment or the majesty of a 3-year-old birthday party. So try to be there in that moment. I've gotten better at it over the years. We tend to suffer our way to wisdom in life, and I've gotten better at it. But again, focus on that child. Focus on the life experiences, the balance of healthcare and living. And then in terms of getting involved to the extent you've got the bandwidth for it, just again, I look, my dad was a cop growing up in North Jersey, and we lived, very modestly growing up. If, it was my parents that this happened to, I don't know that they would have acted any differently than we did. When our kids were diagnosed, I was a year out of business school with $150,000 in student loans. And a negative net worth, we didn't have any means to bring to it. We just brought a lot of passion. And which every one of these families brings. So channel it as best you can. I believe, in terms of practical steps of what families and patient organizations, no matter how small a disease may be, help find more children. You will help those families enormously. You will also help the design of clinical studies and ultimately speed the path for any gene therapy, any medicine to approval. And also help us build these natural history studies. We cannot do gene therapy studies in most all of these diseases with placebo control. That doesn't work. And probably the best alternative are robust, retrospective, backward-looking, and prospective, forward-looking natural histories. So
I would just quickly add, take a deep breath, understand that the diagnosis is not the end of the world in the next 15 seconds. And like John said, take it slow with the bandwidth that you have. First of all, remember one thing, whatever you think is happening, it's not only happening to you. Somebody somewhere else on the planet is living a similar experience. And now with the wonder of the fact that we're all connected, you have to reach out and find those people. It is not a sign of weakness, certainly, to ask for help and to surround yourself with people that are maybe in different places with the diagnosis. If they've been living with it a few more years, they may be able to be somewhat of a mentor to you as far as getting connected, like we talked about, getting in with, people that can help you with treatment and care options, stuff like that. But I would also say that when you have a rare chronic condition that you are going to constantly, through your child, or if it's you yourself, you're going to live through the cycle of grief over and over again. It's not like when someone passes and you kind of, I don't want to say move on, but you go through the anger, denial, acceptance. When you have a chronic illness, every time you lose a function or something happens and there's a setback, it starts over again. And I think it's important to realize that that's a normal occurrence and there's nothing wrong with you. But on the human side of grieving, you're going to go through that over and over again. And it's going to be very important at those times to lean on the people that are also in your world. I do a lot of work with Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy, and one of the things we always say when we get together is, welcome to the best family that you don't want to belong to, because we really are, and we lean on each other for things over and over again in all kinds of ways, either from getting medical equipment or just, hey, I'm having a really rough day, or, hey, this happened and it's great. So take a breath. It's not the end of the world in the next 10 seconds. And like John said, you have to balance. I enjoyed reading about your journey, John, when you call it the Crowley Fun Bus. I could picture it. When you're rolling out, and I live that too. Going anywhere is, I bring the power chair, and then I bring a manual chair, and then I have my nighttime breathing stuff, and I have my portable Hoyer lift, and my wife is like, this is unbelievable. I'm like, well, this is my life. So if we're going to go have fun, I got to bring the dog and pony show. But you know what? It's great memories, and you have to be able to do that as well, because that's really what matters in life.
Yeah, that's really
said. Beautifully said.
It's really great. I agree. It's great to hear that from both of you. And I'll even just throw in that I love what you're saying, Pat, about asking questions. I think those of us in the medical field, we're used to asking the questions. We need to get the information, and then when we have questions asked of us, sometimes they're really hard to answer, and especially when it's this sort of big anvil of a diagnosis. I think we want to be able to help and refer out, and that referral is really like to people like you, because you know, that,
Well,
that
and thank you for that. And I don't mean to cut you off, but I don't want to lose this point. I think as a doctor, I've dealt with so many medical professionals in my life. I instantly have more respect for the healthcare professional if they say to me, you know what, I'm not going to lie, this sucks. I'm not sure of the answer. I'm going to get back to you. And would you be interested in connecting with some other families? I would much rather hear that than some doctor pull a book off the shelf and say, well, as soon as they start to think they know everything, that's when I go, uh-oh, red flag. I'd much rather have a human answer of, you know what, we'll figure this out. I'm not going to leave you alone, but I don't know right now. Let me get back to you. Instant respect.
Yeah, I hear that. I want to get to a couple others. There, in particular, about the caregivers, and I've heard, Pat, you talk about it, and John, you've mentioned, especially now in the context of spending time with your kids. And it's not without notice that we're three men on this panel, but I think, as is very common, that mothers are often caregivers, and there are a bunch of questions here that I kind of want to just coalesce about, how we help caregivers. What's the responsibility of companies to help caregivers and support them during trials, and what about the information coming from the companies in terms of the data and how they make decisions, but also what to do with that data. How does the family interpret it? So it's a big, I know that's a multiple points there, but I think we'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, I'll just say none of this would work, Moshe, without the caregivers. We wouldn't have much of a journey and wouldn't have much to fight for. So essential, but that also means they're essential throughout every part of this process. So when we think about, the topic today, considering participation in gene therapy, clinical research, and ultimately access broadly to gene therapies, it's a whole host of considerations. It's one parent alone. If there are two parents in a family, can't do it. So as much as you can bring the entire family unit, at Amicus, we often try to think about the patient as the patient's family, the entire family unit. We do these patient lunch and learns. We always invite the entire family. We've done multiple sessions hearing just from the caregivers. What is life like for them? What do they need to provide better care? What do they need for their own lives? But then also too, as an extension of the community. So on the issue of transparency that you referenced here, a lot of gene therapy work is iterative. Most, as you know better than any, medicine is often iterative. So we'll learn from our failures. I believe it's ethically important for companies to disclose everything they've learned when a study fails. That's something we've lived as a principle at our company, publishing data, sharing, meeting with other companies, patient organizations, sharing clinical data. That notion of, I think broadly, of empowerment is just so fundamentally important. So caregivers are essential at really every step of the process.
And again, I'll just quickly add that a caregiver quickly becomes a member of the family. And I think, John, you would likely agree that when you have found a caregiver that is really doing it for the right reasons and they're able to work with your family, they become a member of your family. And then if in such times when they have to go, it's devastating because it's kind of like losing an arm. I've had people come in and out of my life and it's like, oh man, and they got to do what's best for them. Another huge ethical question, it's how do you find quality people, especially if you don't have the socioeconomic means to be connected. I know in my own case, when everything is normal without COVID, I am up at 5:30 in the morning and I am sitting at my desk at school by 7. Now, my wife handles the morning duties and we have 2 boys that are 6 and 4. Thankfully, they have grandmothers nearby to help. It's been almost impossible for me to find a caregiver that will show up reliably at 5:30 in the morning on a weekday, especially living in New Hampshire. Try that in the middle of February. I mean, it's, I don't know, you patch things through. I have good friends, as John said, extended family. It's a tough one. But again, in participation with a clinical trial, yes, that has to be considered, because if you're traveling, what's going to happen? Are they going to come? Are they, I've bribed friends. I'll do whatever means I have to do to keep it going. But yeah, it's basically like you want a clone of a full functioning human being next to you at all times, just to be able to get through the day. So again, no easy answers, but caregivers become part of the family, definitely.
John, I want to ask and sort of drill down a little bit about that caregiver support and, in terms of mental health, a couple of questions just referencing the level of support that that can be provided. Whose responsibility is it? And again, where the psychological burden comes in for families, and obviously experienced in different ways depending on the makeup of the family.
Yeah, look, it's hard enough playing our individual roles as they're somewhat traditionally defined. What does a dad, what does a mom do, a husband, a wife? That's hard on a good day. And then you throw in, of course, the stress of caring for a special needs child. And Pat, you alluded to it earlier. It's true. It's a lifelong journey. It changes your life and your perspective. It can be very challenging. What I try to describe for my friends who are blessed to have very healthy children is to say, imagine the time when your kid is really sick, when they had that appendicitis, or they had a bad flu, or whatever it may be. Now, make that never end. How do you adjust your life, your perspective, your rhythm as a family? What you have to realize is that you do have to adjust, but you also have to take those breaks when you can. Eileen and I went years without taking a vacation after the kids were diagnosed, just even kind of a 3-day weekend alone. And we finally started doing that again once. It took years, but once we had nurses and family members who can help support us with the kids, to take those breaks is incredibly important. It's hard to do, but to try to balance it all.
I will just say quickly on the other end though, John, it's very grounding. I'm sure you find the same thing. I never find myself getting upset sitting in my car in traffic. These things don't matter to me. If I'm at a red light 30 seconds longer than I have to be, if the line at, to go get the coffee is a little longer, you see people flipping out, and I think they have no idea what really sets, it's grounding. I think we're blessed with the fact that we look at things with a completely different perspective, and the little things, I don't know about you, but I don't sweat them anymore.
I think years ago, there was some measure of transference where the little things I sweated more than I should have, because I was kind of pissed off about, life, working, whatever it was. Science wasn't moving fast enough. And then I think you learn to be grateful and really treasure the moment and live in the moment. And, I often will share, as I try to provide advice maybe to nieces and nephews, that, oh God, it's awful, and my final exams are unfair, and this whatever, and I'm stuck at home during COVID, and I'll tell them, why don't you go down the hall and just describe to your cousin Patrick, as he's, getting ready with his mom and his nurse's help, in a wheelchair, on a ventilator, getting ready to go to work. Why don't you tell him how unfair life is? And you know what? You realize life isn't fair. And I think it was Bill Gates or somebody said, so you get over it. And then you live in the moment, and always, always grateful. And, for all the struggles, we've been blessed tremendously in so many ways. And for that, we're very grateful.
Well,
Yeah.
John, Pat, we are grateful to both of you for spending time with us today. And I really appreciate, I certainly get the feeling that there is a network of so many roles that we all can play to really move this forward. And I think that we can carry that together, including all the people who have joined us today. We're out of time, and I want to thank both of you. Tomorrow, same time at noon, we have Dr. Sandy McRae, Dr. Art Kaplan, and Dr. Lesha Shah. We're going to discuss operationalizing informed consent in pediatric gene therapy research. Thanks everybody for joining us today. And Pat and John, I look forward to working with you guys in the future. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Thanks, everybody.
You too. Thank you.